Turned up at the station. It was the end of the day. It was the first week in March. It was freezing cold, but clear. It was beautiful, clear days in the winter in Japan. And it was freezing cold. I got to Mashiko. I got off the train. I thought, right, this is my life here now. This is where I'm going to live. So there's hundreds of school kids, and I thought, well, they're not going to know of a 5-star hotel in Mashiko where I can stay with a jacuzzi and hot and cold running water, because they were all staring at me, going, bloody hell, you're ugly. I needed some common sense, so I got hold of this lady there who was a farmer's wife. She looked at me as if I was, really was Medusa. Anyway, she came round and she got her son, and we had a bit of a conversation, and I said I want to stay somewhere, and he just took me to the ryokan. A ryokan is an inn. He works in the Pottery, and that's it. That's how things kick off. My name is William Plumptre. I'm a potter. I'm 61 years old, and I live in Witherslag in South Cumbria, which is just within the national park, where I've made pottery for 25 years, and previously in the middle of the lakes at Patterdale. I trained in Japan and I went to art school, and it has been my life ever since, and I enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. Is that okay?
Beautiful. 10 out of 10, William.
I'm going to take my glasses off because the glasses are giving me a headache, because the headphones are pushing them onto my temples. Can you believe it?
But you've also got a crack in them, William. How do you cope?
Am I? Yeah, I have. You're right. Have you seen that?
I can see it.
I have got a crack in it.
How's he coping with this?
Now, it's him making these pots with his glasses are cracked. There won't be a cent. Not one of them will be round.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for joining me on the Proper Job podcast. So, Will or William?
William. I don't mind, but William sounds better.
So let's start right at the beginning, William. How were you within the structure of school? Did you fit in?
I fitted in my department.
And what was your department?
Well, that was exactly it. That was my department. I think a way to answer that is an idea of where I was going was that when I got to senior school, there were two choices. You could either join the Army Cadet Force, or you could go and do social services. And I went to do social services because I didn't like the Army Cadet Force, and I was never very good with discipline. So for that reason, I probably didn't fit into the ranks of school very easily overall. But when I went to school at 8 years old and was sent off to school, it was all quite draconian. It was a long time ago, and there were some strange ideas. But anyway, that was then, and we are now. And I did and I didn't fit in. I didn't know that at the time that I was disliking it, because I didn't know any different. I had nothing. Obviously, I had nothing to compare it with.
What kind of pressures were there in terms of getting a job? You've just spoken there about coming across as a bit of anti-establishment. Was there a pressure of getting a normal 9-to-5 job?
Not from within my family, there wasn't. No, not at all.
So there was, you do what you want to do, not anything else.
You do what you want to do up to a point. My parents were they were quite sort of libertarian in that way, I have to say, and I'm grateful for that. My father was a farmer.
Okay.
And my mother my mother looked after him, basically.
Sure.
But she did a host of other things as well. Least of all, play the piano. She was a gifted pianist. Studied at the Royal Academy.
Right.
Did 3 years there to be a trained classical pianist. And they were pretty relaxed about getting a job, and I was under no pressure. So I went off to art school when I left school. Eventually I went to art school.
Where did that idea come from?
I came from making pots, and it came from making pots at school, because the one thing I was able to do at senior school was make pots.
So there's a pottery class.
Yeah. No, I did a lot of pottery classes, and I had a teacher there who was well known in pottery, called Ian Gregory. He's a potter down in Dorset where I was at school, and he made it interesting, and he made it fun. There wasn't a sort of credit score with doing pottery. You could just do pottery. You know, you weren't erring on the side of 30 out of 20 for an essay, or indeed 5 out of 20 for an essay, which would have been my score. But the pottery was a great fallback. It was, and I really enjoyed it actually, and the art and the art, the drawing and the painting side, but particularly the pottery.
So where did you go to art school?
I went to Chelsea Art School and did a 3-year design course in ceramics when they were up in Lime Grove up in Shepherd's Bush, and I went there in 1980 for 3 years. We did a ceramic design, and I think it was called ceramic design and technology, but with hindsight, it was a long way from what I needed to do, what I wanted to do. It was really a stepping stone. It was a case of finding out what I didn't want to do in order to continue down that path. Yeah, so I came out of art school, and I did some painting. I painted for about 15 months. I used to paint landscape, and I used to paint still life, and I did some ceramics, and then I thought, hang on, this isn't really satisfactory. I got to stop this. I got to do something else. I'll go back to the pottery full time, and I'd read a bit about Bernard Leach, quite a bit about Bernard Leach, and in the conversation of learning about Bernard Leach, the name Shoji Hamada had popped up, and I was living in a cottage, and at this point of the pressure of getting a job comes into play. So I sat down one day with my mother and father, and I said, you know what, I think I'll go and live in Japan. And they went, right, okay. Well, in 1983, 1982, that sort of throwaway comment was quite a long way down the road. You know, it wasn't like getting a 9-to-5 job. For obvious reasons, my family didn't know anybody who lived in Japan, but they were soon to find out. So I did. I got fed up with everything. I tried to get a job in England. I tried to get a job in potteries. I tried to get a job down in the West Country, and no one wanted to give me a job as an apprentice potter. And I ended up talking to a man called Seth Karji, who was the son of Michael. And he said, I can't help you, but he said, I wish you well. Anyway, about 6 months later, after I'd seen him, I was sitting in my cottage with this large suitcase packed, ready to go the next day. And the telephone rang. It was Seth Karji. And he said, look, come back. He said, we'll work something out. And he said, I'll help you, you can work here and do some work, throwing. I said, I'm really sorry. I said, I'm going away tomorrow to Japan. And he just turned around and he said, you'll have a far better time in Japan than you'll ever have here. He said, get out there. And I just thought, that's it. That's what I'm looking for. And I wanted, I wanted that sort of endorsement.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm okay now. I can go. I mean, I didn't, not to that extent, but I mean, I didn't think about the consequences of going out to Japan on a single ticket. Anyway, I made a few inquiries. I wrote 72 grant-making applications, 72 letters. I remember I had 12 replies, and one of them was positive, and that came to nothing. And at the end of that, I thought, I was given the grant-making book for grants and applications to students. There's nothing technical in those days. You had to sit down with a book the size of a wisdom, and you had to read it. It was crazy. It took me weeks to find out what. It took me weeks to find out what chapter of the book Pottery came under, and then once you got a chapter of the book Pottery came under. Of the 8,000 grant-making organisations, 3 of them would do pottery. It was crazy, and I spent weeks and weeks and weeks writing to all these people, and they all wrote back and said, "You've missed the boat, chum. You know, all the money's gone."
Wow.
And I didn't know about things like Daiwa foundations or scholarships or anything like that. You know, it was, and eventually I just thought, I'm going. I'm fed up with this. I'll just go on my own. So that's what I did. And then about a week before I went, I met someone, and he said, "I live in Tokyo. You better come and see me." And I did. And he gave me the keys and to a little apartment he had. He said, "Make yourself at home. I'm going skiing. I'm away for the whole week, so you're on your own." And that was it.
So you must have thought at that time like everything was kind of clicking into place of going to Japan, but obviously we're before the age of emails and the internet and all those kinds of things. So how did you just get this ticket and turn up at the airport? And so you the week before it all fitted into place that you had a place to stay, but before that you were kind of like, what am I going to do?
Yeah, no, I was winging it, as they say. I was winging it. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was going to go to a youth hostel. But I had such an enormous suitcase, that wouldn't have worked. I couldn't have been lugging this suitcase around Tokyo. It was the size of a trunk, you know. It was anyone. If you'd seen it, it's always off on the grand tour, this lad. You know, he's going around Europe with coach and horses. I was wholly unprepared, but I wasn't. I mean, I didn't know what you can't prepare for what you don't know. So, no, Nick was a godsend, but he only went to as far as accommodation. You know, he only went so far down the platform. The rest of the platform was for me to sort out. So it took me about a week to get the underground map the right way up in Tokyo, and once I'd worked that out, because you know there was nothing digital.
All translated, I expect.
No, there was no Romaji. There was no street names in those days, and nothing written in Romaji. So you and the worst thing was if you ever got into a taxi. Taxis were seriously renowned for taking you 400 miles in the opposite direction. You got in the back of a taxi, you really got in there at your peril. And if you got out and shut the door, then they got really angry, because all the doors on the Tokyo taxis were electric. So as you get out, the door shuts automatically. And what all the foreigners used to do, the gaijins would get out and slam the door. And the taxi driver was sitting there, it ringing in his ears as he was trying to listen to the racing. And that was my experience of Japanese taxi drivers. So, no, I mean, I was going to where Bernard Leach went to, which was Mashiko Machi in Tochigi Ken. And I knew nothing about how to get there, or anything about where to stay, or what I was going to do for a job.
But you had an address then?
No, I had nothing.
You've landed in Japan and you've gone to the apartment.
Yeah, I got his. Oh, I went to Nick's apartment. Yeah.
What was your research technique to find out what the next move was going to be, William?
I went to Ueno Station, which is a huge, massive station at the top of Tokyo, which is the station's about the size of Birmingham itself. It's a huge place, and I said I want to get a train to Mashiko, and everyone went, "Where the bloody hell's Mashiko?" I said, "Well, it's in." Oh, it said it's in Tochigi. It's up there. Blimey, you know, it was real hick country, as we say. You know, hick. It was proper out there in the sticks. Anyway, I found out that it was going to take me 3.5, 4 hours on a local train. So I went home, back to the flat. I got organised to go up there. I went to exhibitions, Japanese National Museum. I saw the most the first 2-3 days I was there, I saw the most amazing exhibition on Kyushu porcelain. And it was it was in an enormous show at the Ueno in the National Museum, and it was a sort of brilliant sort of kicking off point. It was just fantastic, and I looked at it and I thought, here we go. This is what I've come to see. This is what I want to, you know, indulge in. And I went to exhibitions and I got around Tokyo, and yeah, I dropped off a cliff. I did. I literally went over the edge. You're in free fall. Unless you're on I mean, you know, if you were in a Western, a banking situation where they pick you up and move you around and accommodate you, if you went out into the middle of Japan, you were on your own, and that was it. And so off I went to Mashiko on the local train.
And was the idea then to sort of like take your bags? You know, you say it's a 3.5, 4 hour train journey.
Mm-hmm.
What was were you just going to turn up, knock on the door, and see what happened?
Turned up at the station. It was the end of the day. It was the first week in March. It was freezing cold, but clear. It was beautiful, clear days in the winter in Japan. And it was freezing cold. I got to Mashiko. I got off the train. I thought, right, this is my life here now. This is where I'm going to live. So there's hundreds of school kids, and I thought, well, they're not going to know of a 5-star hotel in Mashiko where I can stay with a, you know, jacuzzi and hot and cold running water, because they were all staring at me going, bloody hell, you're ugly. I needed some common sense, so I got hold of this lady there who was a farmer's wife. She looked at me as if I was, you know, really was Medusa. Anyway, she came round and she got her son, and we had a bit of a conversation, and I said I want to stay somewhere, and he just took me to the ryokan. A ryokan is an inn. He works in the Pottery, and that's it. That's how things kick off. So he dropped me off, and he never said a word, and he drove like a maniac, and we were sitting in the cab of it, you know, those tiny little trucks that sort of deliver tofu and, you know, noodles and stuff like that, zippy round. We were sat in the front of this, and there wasn't room with my bags. There wasn't room to swing a cat. You know, I was right on top of him, and I'd only met him 2 seconds earlier, and we got you know, he dropped me off at this place. The next day, no, I tell a lie. Takashi Yasuda, Japanese potter, Takashi lives in, I don't know where he lives now, but then he lived in Devon. He'd given me a telephone number of a lady, of a potter in Mashiko, to call her just to say hi. And the next day, I rang her up. And I said, I'm here. Well, she didn't speak any English. So she spoke Japanese and I spoke English. And eventually we met, and she said, I can't help you, but I know a man who might. And I went to his workshop and I walked in, and this was the first day there, and he had an Australian girl there called Susan, who I got to know very, very well. And he said, yeah, you can work here too. He said, over in that, get in the corner, and you can have that wheel. And I said, okay. And he said, yeah, he can do as long as he wants. 6 months, whatever, 12 months. And it was all very sort of easy come, easy go. And he said, you can come and live here in the workshop. You can sleep upstairs in the exhibition room, and you can have a futon and off you go. And I met this Susan, and I met a couple of other Australians. There were lots of Australians there. I say lots in Mashiko. Mashiko has about 350 potters.
Oh wow, okay.
It's a town. Mashiko's about the size of less than the size of Kendal.
Right.
It's tiny.
Okay.
It's tiny. And there were 350 potters there. And I suppose in total about a dozen foreign students at one time, mostly Australian and American. And off we went. I started work there, and he gave me a lump of clay. He said, get your clay. And he sat on the wheel, and he gave me an egg cup, tiny little cup. And he said, make that. Just get on and throw it. But this was all in Japanese. This was all in sort of, quite a lot of sign language and not much talking actually, more pointing. Just get on with it. There wasn't any point in explanation. No, I wasn't speaking any Japanese. I did it for 3 months before I went. I knew the days of the week, but I didn't know what stoneware clay was, which is what I should have been learning. I knew how to say Tuesday, but that wasn't any help. He said, I'll come back later and see you. I thought, right, okay. So I thought later, later, he might come back. Later, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. He didn't come back for 3 weeks. So I thought, right, okay, I'll just carry on doing what I'm doing. So after 3 weeks, I had a fair idea about how to make this coffee cup, this teacup. I had a real pain in my knee because I was kicking a Japanese kick wheel. It's very, very, it's hard. It's really hard. It's not a momentum wheel, so you're kicking it at the same time as you're throwing. So you have to keep your upper body still, and your left leg is kicking, and you start rocking around, and you get clay everywhere, and your left knee, which is your kicking knee, gets a pain in it like you've never had a pain before. Anyway, that's how I started.
So, different technique obviously to the UK. How were you with your
clay? The wheel goes round the wrong way. So in Japan they're throwing clockwise.
Right.
In here we're anti-clockwise.
Were you confident with your ability there when you went?
Wouldn't have mattered if I was or I wasn't.
What about your personality then? Were you confident in how you came across? Were you a confident person?
It was such an open canvas. It didn't really matter about my ability, and it didn't really matter about my confidence. The one thing I had to do was adjust to a way of life. I could have gone in there with 8 PhDs in throwing, and they would have said, this is where you start, it's called the beginning, and this is where you're going to start. We're not interested in PhDs, and we're not interested in what you know. We've been doing this for 10,000 years, and this is what you're going to do. And by the way, the wheel goes round the other way. And that's it. Just embrace it.
Sure.
That's what, they weren't interested in what I knew, because what I knew wasn't worth anything,
So how did you feel during that time then? Did you feel out of depth? Or were you like you kind of person
No.
who just got on with it?
No, I just got on with it because I had a sort of, I thought the throwing of the pots was the easy bit. Everything else was quite complicated. So, for instance, you know, if you went into the supermarket and you came out with, you know, something that looked like shampoo, it was washing powder, liquid for the washing machine. You could either rub that in, or you could put something on your toothbrush that was toothpaste. It wasn't, it was mayonnaise. And you went, you know, well, you wanted to get a driving license, and they look at you like, well, you know, that's going to take time. And it was the day-to-day life, you know, what life throws at you, the technicalities.
Yeah.
Were the difficult bits. But yeah, I mean, I was familiar with throwing pots. I could throw pots, but it's called culture shock.
Yeah.
That was the key to it, you know, and that was difficult.
So how long were you at this place for then?
6 months, nearly 6 months, and I did 6 months with them, and I thought I can't go on here forever. My left leg's about to drop off. I'm throwing the same teacup. I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, throwing a teacup for 6 months in Japan is nothing. You know, you can throw a teacup in Japan for 3 years, and then they'll say, okay, yeah, why don't you do something else today? You know, sweep the floor instead. I thought I wanted a change. And I'd met a few people by then, and I'd taken up karate. I did that twice a week. I needed to do something that stopped me sort of stiffening up, and because I was sitting in a very awkward position on the potter's wheel. I wasn't used to it. I wasn't the right shape. I've got long legs and a short back, and they had a long back and short legs. They were perfect. You know, they could sit there for days. And I was in agony, so I went and did karate. And that was amazing. That was incredible. Tuesdays and Saturdays for an hour and a half on the evening. And I used to go up to the school rec hall and do it. And there were 50 people in this room with this huge gym, and 90% of them were under the age of 15, and they used to be screaming at the top of their voices, going up and down, doing the kata, doing the exercises. And I thought, this is why I've come, you know. And they were all absolutely, the enthusiasm, and these children, and their sort of, it was just great. It just opened your eyes. And all the black belts were all rice farmers. You know, they worked in the fields and they worked in the country. They weren't city slickers. And they were the nicest, most humble, easygoing guys you ever met. They were so relaxed, and they were fantastic karate teachers. And they could speak no English, but they loved it. And they used to get hold of me and they'd say, no, that's great, but just a bit higher, you know, leg higher. You know, I was flat on my back. Fantastic.
And was that good for networking then, and social? Or was that just good for good for a bit of exercise?
Good for me,
yeah.
Actually. That was good for me. The networking was a slow process. You know, it was slow and fast. I mean, you sort of got to a sort of point where you met people, and then nothing really happened for a few months, and then you met some more. And I was offered English teaching. I got English teaching quite quickly, because that's how I supported myself, was it with English teaching in the evening. Because the first and second potters I worked for didn't pay any money. So the first potter, I worked for him for 6 months making things. I had no wages. So in the evening I did Monday, Wednesday and Friday. I taught English for 2 hours. And then I had a little bit of pocket money I dumped in Tokyo, which was a real sort of reserve, emergency. But you didn't need a lot of money. You could live real cheap in Mashiko, very, very cheaply. But after 6 months, I'd met a few people, and I met this man, and he was a kiln builder. And he said, "Do you want to come and build kilns for 6 months?" And I thought, yeah, perfect. I'd love to build kilns, because what I really wanted to do was build the Japanese climbing kiln called the Nobori Gama, which is a wood-fired kiln, which the Japanese have. Nobori is the Japanese verb to climb, so it climbs up the hill. They have different chambers, fired with wood, centuries old, and I wanted to learn how to fire one of these. Unfortunately, we spent most of the time building another sort of kiln that was wood-fired, but not a traditional Japanese Nobori kiln, which was, it was great. I had a great time, and Tamaki-san, who I worked for, was a really nice guy. The previous potter had got a bit sort of a little bit tricky. He was quite a difficult guy to work for, and it was you got into a few right angles. It was just quite complicated, and I eventually moved out and lived with Susan, because Susan left and went back to Australia, and all the students took over one another's houses. So when one student left, the house went to the next student, and then that student left and left it to someone else, and that's how it worked in Mashiko. Eventually, my house that I lived in, I took from Susan, was bulldozed so that the road could be widened, because it was only a tiny little 4-roomed farmhouse. It was wooden, and it was properly traditional, but it was in the way of a roundabout, so it had to go, which was a shame. But anyway, I moved there by then, and I worked for Tamaki-san, and he was great. He was a lovely guy, and we worked really hard. And then he started giving me a bit of pocket money, 50 quid a week or something. I don't know what it was. And he said, yeah, we had really good fun. And he was a sensei, a teacher of the fox dance in the Japanese omatsuri, in the festival. And that opened up a sort of side of Japan that I was clueless about. And then things became, they became exciting, because Tamaki-san would try to describe to me what Japanese omatsuri was about, and the festivals and the different folk dances that they had there, and he had all the costumes for it, and it was fascinating. And he was brilliant. He used to do the kitsune, which is the fox dance with the character and the folklore, dressed up as a fox with a sort of snouty little Japanese mask on. I have one here. And he would show me how he did it, and he used to go off on tour at the end of the summer and get very drunk and do this folklore dancing. And I thought, this is it, this is great. And I learnt a lot from him. He was a great guy to work for. Lovely. He was a lovely man.
So the contrast with the wooden firing kiln is different to the UK version. That was gas, was it?
No, you can fire with wood wherever you are, as long as you have a plentiful supply, and as long as it's dry.
Right.
And the Japanese were very particular about firing with wood, and their traditional kiln is a climbing kiln called the Noborigama, but they also fired other kilns with wood that weren't designed in that style. In English pottery, you fired, in Stoke-on-Trent you fired with coal, but you could also fire with wood. It's been one of the drawbacks possibly of living in the Lake District where I am now, is that we have so much rain up here that firewood is permanently wet through.
Yeah.
And wood going into a kiln needs to be bone dry, because you create steam and you create moisture, and that's not what you want. You want bone dry, very heat creating wood. So in Japan we only burn red pine, matsu, which created the most enormous amount of heat at 1300 centigrade. We could fire the climbing kiln to 1300 with ease, and we could have all the cones, all the parametric cones flat on the kiln shelf at 1300, and that was.
Tell me what those are. Sorry, William. Those cones. Is that a measurement of the heat?
Exactly. So the cones go up in a range of cones, Orton cones, and they will have a fluxing agent in them, and they'll be made for every different temperature that a kiln will be likely to fire at. So you'll have a range of cones for a stoneware firing would start. Stoneware firing will start possibly around 1200, and they'll go right up to over 1300 degrees. And you'll have a cone for each of those 10 to 15 degrees. So the Orton cones that I use to fire here in the gas kiln, I use Orton cones 8, 9, 10 and 11. And those cones only melt at 8, 12, 65 or 70, I can't remember exactly what it is, up to cone 11, which would melt just under 1300. And that's how pottery firings, it's a practical thermometer.
It's a consumable, a new one every time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And the temperature gauge on the kiln is telling me that I've got a certain temperature on my pyrometer. But if I want to know more precisely how long I've been firing and what my temperature is really doing, I take a brick out and I look in the kiln. And I look at what the cones are doing. And they will tell me when the firing's going to end, not the pyrometer. I'll do it on the cones and test pieces, which is how they did it in Japan. They had cones in the kiln, in the climbing kiln, and they had test pieces. So test pieces are little bits of clay, rings. You can have rings with a hole in them, and you have a spike, and you take them out at top temperature, and you plunge them into cold water, and you look at the surface of the ring, and the surface of the ring will tell you what's going on in the kiln. And we used to take these out of the kiln in Japan, and people take them out of kilns here, and it gives you an exact picture of what's happening with your firing. It's accurate, much more so than doing it on a temperature gauge or a controlled kiln, or where you're just switching it on and leaving it.
So when you're making these teacups for 6 months, was it an unwitting sort of choice, I don't know the choice of words there, but was it something you wanted to understand the methods of building these kilns to help you, or was it you just fancied a change? Was it a purposed choice to learn how the process of that works? Yeah, no,
I wanted to learn how to build kilns.
Right. To help you.
It was all part of the process. Yes, right. It's all part of the process.
Okay, so grassroots understanding, learn the foundations and build yourself up.
Yeah. And there are only 2 kiln builders in Mashiko. There was Tamaki Tomotsu and another one. Mm-hmm. So to go and work with them was, it was gold dust. It really was. And I'd struggle to build a climbing kiln now. And somewhere upstairs in my office, I've got a set of climbing kiln plans, but it's for an enormous kiln that I wouldn't be able to build. I mean, it's vast. These kilns were huge. They used to fire thousands and thousands of pots in them, in the big commercial potteries in Mashiko. And the 1 or 2 of the kilns were still firing when I was living there. Most of them had gone on to gas, but 1 or 2 of them were still firing with wood.
Right. So is it that once that kiln's fired, you can use it again and again, or is it you're going to have to do alterations to it?
No, you use it again and again. The kiln, over a period of time, which is what's happened to my kiln here, which is gone this year, I've got a new one. by sheer weight of volume of heat going into it, will start disintegrating. It will start to burn up because they just get eroded. And they fall to bits because they come under such a huge amount of heat. Coupled with the fact in Japan we had a lot of earthquakes, so the earthquakes are moving the foundations around. And if you looked at these climbing kilns in Japan, you would think, my God, how on earth does that stand up? They were precarious. And on the firings on them, after 2.5, 3 days, we'd come into work in the middle of the night because you used to start a 12 o'clock shift and go through till 8 in the morning. And the whole kiln room, but you'd think, they're going to burn the whole bloody village down. It would be just a blaze of flame coming out everywhere because it was desperate to get oxygen, you see. You were on a reducing atmosphere, so the kiln was just, flame was coming out of all the spy holes and you used to go there, and it was, I thought, blimey, you know, if health and safety saw it, they'd shut you down. But you know, I remember the one day where there was one of the firings we did. There was an island off the coast of Japan that had a volcano, and it had erupted. And this was my second year, so this was when I was working for Mr. Shimaoka, which is another potter, and he was paranoid that we were going to get a really big earthquake. So we filled up 50 dustbins of water and put them all around the kiln, which it wouldn't have made any difference, because even 50 dustbins of water wouldn't have put the kiln out. You know, we fired 15.5 tons of wood. It wouldn't have made any difference. But he was paranoid about it.
So that's in the one session. How long? So the session. How long is a firing?
93 hours we used to fire for. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was 3.5 days.
And so you all taking different shifts?
Yeah, we'd start on a Friday morning, and then on Friday night was the lonely watch. So there was me and Sebastian Scheid and myself, and to start, and then Richard came from Australia when we worked at Shimaoka's at Sensei's. So what would happen is that we did 6. When I went to work for Mr. Shimaoka, which was the second year I was in Japan, we did 6 glaze firings in a climbing kiln. So that was a huge number of firings. We were very lucky. He was really busy at the time, and you'd start it on a Friday morning, and he'd go through to 5 o'clock, and then one of you would work from 5 to midnight, and then one of you would come in at midnight and work till 8 o'clock in the morning. And then the Saturday you worked until midday, and then about 2-3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, so after the kiln had been going for about 30 hours, you started a team, 3 of you. And then on Saturday night there'd be 4 of you, because the more people came, the more you stoked. So the stoking was front stoking and then side stoking, and all sorts of, you know, you get bigger and bigger and bigger as you went up the kiln. So by Saturday night, it was properly alight. So
we're talking, when you're working on the kiln, you're talking someone, whoever it is putting fuel in, so putting wood in, but also stoking it to push air into the kiln as well.
No, you don't need to push air in, because the air would be sucked into the kiln as you took the
because it's a climbing out. So because it's a climbing
precisely
one, the pressure.
Yeah, no, but
okay.
Air would be sucked into a kiln regardless of it being climbing or not, because the secondary air hole where you took the bung out to put the wood in, that would just draw in a huge amount of air from the outside. The draft of the kiln was immense. You know, you could get the heat going through the kiln would at the bottom of the kiln to the top of the kiln, I suppose, was about 5 or 6 yards long, 7 yards long.
Okay.
And that heat went right from the bottom right to the top. I mean, the flame coming out of the chimney, which was only a 10-foot chimney, but the flame coming at the top of that was nearly as much again. So you got a 10 to 15-foot flame coming out, just blazing away.
So your job's regulating the heat?
Yeah, very, very much. But you didn't just stoke it, because the person in charge of that shift, who was one of the Japanese workers, well, they were absolutely meticulous about how much wood you put in and how you put it in. So you couldn't just bung it in. It wasn't like, you know, doing a bonfire in the autumn with shoving the leaves on it. If you put the wood in the wrong way, you knocked over one of the pots in the front of the kiln. And if you knocked over one of the pots in the front of the kiln, it could be, well, if it was a wood ash pot, it'd be worth a lot of money. But I think it's just a bit. That came in the second year when I worked for Mr. Shimaoka, and that really upped my game. That was a whole different environment, because he went on to be a national treasure, a national living treasure of Japan. He was a great potter, and he was a wonderful man. And I saw his work in Mashiko. After about 6 or 7 months, and he did a certain decoration technique that I looked at and I saw and I really liked. And I said to my boss, who was a kiln builder, Mr. Tomei, I want to go and work for him. And he said, well, you can forget that idea, because you ain't going there, chum. I said, why not? He said, because he'll have lots and lots of foreign students, and he'll be booked up. And he said, you won't get and he really laughed. And a week later I said, no, I said, look here, I am going to work for him. Watch me. He said, right, okay. He said, look, if you're going to want to go and work for Mr. Shimaoka, I'll tell you how to do it. I said, okay. He said, right, get on the train, go down to Tokyo. Because you're not going to get in there if you just rock up and say, hi, I'm Will, I'm from England.
Yeah.
That is not going to work. You are dealing with a formal introduction.
Right.
Go down to your embassy. So I rang up the embassy. I said, I'm going to see a man, Mr. Shimaoka. Oh yes, they said. We know all about Mr. Shimaoka. And they said, well, you need a letter, don't you? And I said, yes. I said, come down and we'll get it. So I went down to see them. Then I went to speak to the British Council, which was a part of the embassy. And they were really nice. And they said, yeah, we'll write to him. Let's give a bit of background. And they said, yeah. So they wrote to him in kanji. And 2 weeks later, he rang up my boss and he said, you got an Englishman there? And he said, yep, he's sitting right here next to me. He said, send him round tonight. So on a cold December night, I pedalled round to Shimaoka Sensei. And he said, come in. He said, I can't give you a job here. Oh. I said, why not? Well, I didn't say why not, but I was terrified. He said, I said, I can't give you a job, but, and he said, you know, I haven't got the room, and I haven't got the space, and I'm busy, and I've got students. Anyway, I said, look, you know, I've been here nearly a year, and I'm working away, and eventually he said, look, okay, hold on, and he got the student that was going, called him in. He said, right, how many wheels have we got? And Sebastian, who was the German student, he said, well, since you got this and that. He said, right, you've got 1 year. I give you 1 year. He said, you can start on the 2nd of January. So, and that was an amazing opening.
So at that point, you've been in Japan a year. At that point,
nearly a year.
Okay. Mm. And so you're then moving again, are you? You're moving from building the kilns to then are you then still? What was the next stage? Were you training, or were you just on like a factory line building, making?
No. So Tatsuzo Shimaoka was Hamada Shoji's apprentice. So Mr. Hamada, who was Bernard Leach's friend, had lots of apprentices. He was the big Mingei folk art potter in Mashikomachi. He went there in the 1920s to establish a pottery there. And he wanted to recreate Japanese folk, what they call Mingei art, which was everyday pots for everyday people. That's basically what it meant. And he started this pottery there because he had the resources. He had clay and he had the wood and he had everything he wanted. And Mr. Shimaoka was one of his apprentices from about after the late 1940s. So when they'd all come back from the war, basically, that's when he went to work there. Or at the beginning, it might have been just at the early 50s. Anyway, he then moved next door and made his own workshop. And Mr. Hamada stayed there, and Bernard Leach would go and see him, and lots of people would go and see Mr. Hamada. The whole world ended up going to see Mr. Hamada. He became a hugely important part of Japanese pottery movement, and Mr. Shimaoka was here, and I went to Mr. Shimaoka's. So he would have people going to work for him all the time. He had an apprentice who would stay with him for 5 years. That apprentice would be Japanese, only Japanese, and then he always had a foreign student. So he had over his lifetime, he had about a dozen, maybe 15 foreign students over a career of 50, 60 years.
What was it about the foreign students? Was there a hierarchy?
No, he either had one or two at one given time. Some of them stayed for a year, like me, and some of them stayed for 2 years or 3 years. He didn't like you to do many more than about 2 years. And then you went off on your way and you did. So if you went to Shimaoka's sensei's and I got the job there, I turned up for work, I'd been in Japan a year, and Sebastian said, right, come with me. And I said, okay. He said, right, we're off to see the box maker. So I went to the box maker, and the box maker said, right, I know what you want. He said, got a pen knife? And I said, yes, I got a pen knife. He said, right, you're going to make all your tools for what you're going to do next week. So I made all these Japanese cherry wood tools with my pen knife. It was basically which you had to have to throw all these pots. So you made these little bits of Japanese cherry wood into kote, what they call kote, which was shaping the inside of the pots. And I made about 3 or 4 of them. And they wouldn't let me go on the wheel until I'd made all my own tools, strings and needles and all these things. So that took about nearly a week to do all that, cutting away all these things, sanding them down so they fitted in my hand. And then they said, right, there's a lump of clay there. There's your wheel in the corner. I was in another corner. And they said, go down there. And Mitchan, who was a Japanese thrower, he was sitting next to me. He said, right, I'm going to make one of these and you're going to make it. And I did it. And then that was it. He said, right, off you go. And then very occasionally, about once every 6 weeks, Mr. Shimaoka would come in and he'd go, oh, how are you getting on? And I'd say, I'm all right, Sensei. He'd say, well, let me have a look what you're doing. And he'd say, yeah, okay, look, do it like this, okay? Try and do it like this. He never said to me, that's no good. He always said, do it like this. He never said a negative comment. He'd always say, okay, but if he'd get on the wheel and he'd have a great big kick at my wheel with his foot. Of course, he'd have it going round the other way. So the area where he was kicking with his foot was where my leg was sitting stationary. And I had a footstool there, and it was wooden. And he always used to get on the wheel and he'd kick this footstool with his toe, because you had bare feet in the throwing ring, no socks on. And he always used to stub his toe and say, "Christ," he said, "that bloody stool's there again, because you're throwing the wrong way round." And I'd go, "Sensei, I'm so sorry." He'd say, "Don't worry." And he'd be holding his toe and throwing these pots. He'd say, "Right, I want you to make it like that. That's how I want you to make it." And then he'd go again, and I wouldn't see him again. Because he worked in a different workshop.
You know, because if you're using it the wrong way, then did he not encourage you to use it the way the Japanese were using it?
No.
No,
Not everybody did.
Right.
Some people changed, but some people didn't.
Okay.
It's very difficult changing. You think, oh, you just straight on it, but it's not.
No, muscle memory and everything.
This hand does this, and this hand does that, and they don't mix at all because of the direction. So his workshop was traditional, long Japanese workshop, long workbench in it, all the wheels set into it, dirt floor, no concrete, no wood, nothing, straight onto the dirt, because the moisture kept the pots nice and wet so that it breathed all the time. You didn't have anything drying out unnaturally. It was all on a sort of depending on weather dependent. The roof was thatched, and then on the other side of the garden, about 50, 60 yards away, no, a bit more, was another building, and that's where Mr. Shimaoka was with his apprentice. And he was in there, and you only went in there when you were asked to go in there. And that wasn't very often.
So at this time, are you repeating the same thing you're making?
Yep. And then after 6 months, he stopped me and he said, "Right, you can make a sake cup." So I made a little sake cup called a gyunomi. I made that for about 3 months. And what they call a tokari to go with it, which is a little vase where you put the sake in and you fill up and I did those. Not very well, because they were incredibly difficult. The smaller the pot became, the more difficult it got, because they weren't interested they were only interested in the sort of balance of it.
The form.
Mitchan used to pick up my work and he'd say, "Oh," he said, that's too heavy. Or he said, "Oh, that's too light." But he wasn't sort of, the shape was important, but it's the weight of it. How did it feel in his hand? And he used to say, "Oh." But if I started making a mess and getting water on the bench next door to him, he went mad. And he used to say, "What? Cut that out. I don't want that, all your bloody water clay on my bit of bench." He'd say, "You work clean and you work like on your bit." He'd say, "Don't start because the wheels were open. There was no enclosure around the wheel. So when you put water on your clay, the centrifugal spun it all out all over the place." And he would say, about the first week, he said, "You needn't think you're going to start messing up my workbench. Throw clean and keep it clean."
In this time, in your mind, are you feeling pressurised, or are you absolutely loving it? Are you completely addicted to what you're doing?
There was no pressure. Because Mr. Shimaoka was making all the decisions. You were just a minion. You were just doing what you were told. And I sort of got by the time I got to Mr. Shimaoka's place, I realised that, my time was going to run out. I could stay in Japan for as long as I wanted, but I realised that overall I wasn't going to be able to live there. And that had dawned on me after about a year. I wasn't going to be able to settle in Japan. Some people settle in Japan, but I wasn't one of them. I wasn't going to be able to do it because it's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And it's not hard making pots in Japan. It's hard just living
the way of
there.
Life.
In the nicest possible way, the way of life. and you're in a situation where you really do not take anything you ever knew before with you to go and live in Japan, if that makes sense at all.
No, definitely.
You know, you really are. And I've taken all my 3 children to Japan. They've all been to Japan at the ages of 16, 17, and they've all had a month with me in Japan. And the moment they step into the airport at Narita or the other one, and they get on the subway, they think, right, forget everything I ever knew, because this is, you know, I mean, my daughter worked out the Tokyo subway in about 3 seconds on her telephone, but she didn't know what food to eat at the table first. She didn't know whether to go for the baked beans, the porridge, the custard, the cream, or the sake. Which one did she eat? Well, if you don't know what to eat first, you're going to starve.
So when you were in Japan, it dawned on you that this wasn't going to be where I wanted to stay. So you were kind of in your head, you were thinking, I need to suck in all this knowledge because I'm not willing to, I don't want to stay here for the rest of my life.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
You had to glean what you could glean. And I went down to stay with a friend of mine. By then I'd made great friends with a couple who lived down in Kurashiki in South Japan, who I'm still in contact with every week now, every month. And he said, you can get another job here. And I said, how long? He said, 3 years. I said, 5 years. I said, yeah, that's quite a long time, Michael. And I'm never going to get another workshop like Mr. Shimaoka's. I mean, I left on the crest of a wave. You know, we did firing after firing after firing. You know, I was really immersed in something there. You know, I had everything around me that, you know, everything was clicking into place. I had a wonderful workshop. I had a great family. I had, you know, quite a lot of friends by then, and it was a very, it was a positive environment. You know, I could learn a lot quite quickly, but this was in another place down in South Japan, and I thought, am I going to start all over again with someone? And I thought, I'm going to go. I'm going to make my way back to the UK, which I did via India and did 3 months there on the way back. I was tired, you know, it was quite a strain because I'd not been back at all to England. So I was a straight stretch of 2 years away. And I was weary, you know, I could feel it. I needed to be I needed someone to say, what are you doing tonight? And I'd say, well, I don't know, really. Well, come on, let's just go to the pub.
You need some creature
I
comforts.
needed that familiarity, and I needed that sort of where I wasn't, you know, I was completely at ease. I mean, I was at ease in Japan, but you were not, you know, you were always on duty. And working at Sensei's was quite high powered, you know. On a Saturday you'd work until 5 o'clock, and then on Saturday at 4 the apprentice would come in, the deshi would come in, he'd say, see you tomorrow morning. I say, right, Sunday, yes, Sunday, you're working tomorrow, we've got to be here. And so it was no question of, oh, it's my auntie's birthday, or oh, it's my grand's doing this, or, you know, it's no question of that.
7 days a week then?
Yeah, in the summer it was, 7 days a week. But that's okay.
You were learning, you enjoyed that.
Yeah, and he was a great man to work for.
So that was the golden years you were there?
Yeah, he was really busy. He had an exhibition in London, he had an exhibition in America, he went away for 3 weeks, he had exhibitions in Tokyo, his apprentice would go with him.
So he was in demand.
He took him with him all over Japan, and the apprentice would sort him out, make his breakfast, make his bed, massage every night, shiatsu, everything. He properly looked after him. Yoshikazu was like a manservant.
Uh-huh.
He was at his side for 5 years, at his side. If you rang him up at 4 o'clock in the morning, he'd have to get up and go.
Okay.
He gave his life to Mr. Shimaoka, and they all did. They were all the same. And when you went back there and met them and everything, the entrenched feeling of respect that everyone, all of his apprentices, and I know a few of them, I've met, because he had one for 5 years, so he'd have a dozen, 20 of them over his lifetime, and they were all entrenched in respect and sort of a huge honour to have been and worked there. And the last one he had was a girl from Kyushu, and she was amazing. She was amazing. She could have organised it with her hands tied behind her back, blindfold. She was just absolutely on it. We all met back there when we did it. We went back for a reunion. Great people.
So, there's a little bit of, there's two things there. You obviously, were you a bit of the apple of his eye?
No.
No. Okay.
But he treated everybody the same.
Right, okay.
He treated all of you the same. Foreign, Japanese, his children. 2 of his children got married when we were there. So they had arranged marriages. So his son was marrying a girl, local. So Mr. Shimaoka and Mrs. Shimaoka used to get dressed into suits and ties and go off and meet the parents and the prospective bride. And the boy used to go with them, the son. I mean, he was a boy, he was 35 years old. And he was quite tricky. He was quite sort of recalcitrant. And he used to be like, what, today? Yes, today. Go and polish your shoes. And they all used to drive off and they'd all get together and meet. And then they eventually, at the end of this sort of formal process, there was a wedding and they got married. So that's how they got married, arranged marriage.
Uh-huh. So when did it, so you're coming to the end of your time in Japan.
Yeah.
You knew that, you had a date set in your mind, did you?
Yeah, he said you can only do a year.
Right, and so
Yeah.
you respected that, and coming up to the end of the year, you made the decision you're going to head back to the UK.
Yeah, I would never have said to him, can I stay longer? Never. Because I wouldn't have wanted to put him in any compromising position where it just wouldn't occur to me to do that.
It's the respect thing.
Absolutely. He said a year, I did a year, that was it. I walked away from it.
And then you come back to the UK. What was your plan then?
I didn't have one. I thought, after where I'd been and what I'd done,
chill out and watch some
we'll
TV
cross
for a
that bridge. Well, just leave it, because you're not going to be able to, you're not going to hit the ground running, as they say, and I didn't. So I came up to the Lake District where we live now, and I decided I was going to make my base up here, for better or worse. I had no reason to come up here than anywhere else, but I did come up here, and I've stayed up here. And I thought, right, I'll start making pots like I made in Japan, and I'll start, do this and do that. And I had all these ideas, and I sat down and I thought, actually, I haven't got a clue what I'm going to do. So I went right back to the beginning, and I thought about everything I'd done in Japan, and I started off by getting a little workshop and building a workshop in the style of Japan, and I had to source clay and do everything, and I built my first kiln and everything, and I thought, everything that I had in Japan was either still digesting in me, it hadn't sort of hit home yet what I had, or I didn't really know what I was doing, because everything you learnt in Japan, it's like what Hamada would say about Mashiko. Everything I do in Mashiko is what I use in Mashiko is from Mashiko. I can't transpose Mashiko to Cumbria in the UK, and I can't take what I'm doing as a Devon potter or in Stoke-on-Trent and do it Wedgwood in Mashiko. That's how he would think, and I had to start from scratch. So all my glazes and the wood ash glazes that I wanted to use with using wood ash as a flux, and I had to sort of work it all out, and it took quite a long time. It took me a few years. Well, actually, 33, because I'm still doing it now. You know,
so
it's never ending.
No. But so then you've obviously then your Lake District elements coming into your work, the northern UK element. You know, you've learnt your techniques and the kilns and the firing, the processes, making your own tools. How did you then? Because like you say, you start your own workshop. How? You know, did you come back with a little bit of money in your pocket?
No money at all.
Right.
None.
So you started
No,
again?
I started again. I had a gallery in London. And they said, we'll give you a show when you get back from Japan. 87, 88, 89 I went there. And it was okay. It worked. And they said, you can come back next year. And I went there for 5 years. And then after that, I got another show up in Glasgow. I got another show in Edinburgh, and I met people, and I thought, maybe this is why I went away. Maybe this is this is coming in, and I realised that it's my time in Japan, and that learning and that sort of compressing it all into those 2 years, it was a great opportunity, and I came back with some really key things that I could do, and I could have made pots in England and I could have made pots in Japan, but Japan, it gave me such a varied palette. I mean, I really loved it there. To come back with everything, and I'm still going back and still learning now. I mean, when did I last go? Last year. So I went last year with our younger daughter, Araminta. I don't know when I'll go again, but I hope to go back quite soon.
So when you're in the workshop back in the UK, that's when they're experimenting. That's where you felt you could experiment with the things that you're being creative.
Yeah. Creative, Nick, up to a point. You're creating, but you're making, and that's the difference in creating. You know, you've got to create. You can create pots, but you've got to make for a living. You know, you've got to start selling. You've got to. I can go on and on and on, creating glazes and working on colours and firing the kiln to 10 different ways, but I've got to start making it into a manageable process. It's not, and that's it's not a hobby. It becomes a full-time job, and I love making my glazes, and I'm getting my wood ashes and the local bits and pieces that I put into glazes, but it's got to have some sense of production about it as well, it's not a whimsical process. You know, I'm not looking out of the Lake District going, oh, Wordsworth today, I'm going to be Wordsworth, I'm going to put a frock coat on and a stiff collar. Forget it. I've just got the bill in for the council tax, and I'm going to go and make some pots. That's what it is. And I think Shimaoka would have said the same. He had a huge family to support. He had to make pots, he had to work hard, and he did. He worked incredibly hard. All the time. And I think that he put that into us. He said, you know, you're not going to get anywhere unless you work really hard. And he was right. Potters in this country they work as hard, definitely. We all work hard, you have to. It's, you know, it's a hard life, but it's, what is it? It's a way of life rather than a job.
So you're selling your work in the galleries, are you? After these exhibitions, you are getting a bit of traction there.
Yeah, I've got pots all over. So I've got pots in York, Blackwell here, the Arts and Crafts House, Edinburgh, Castlegate, Cockermouth, lovely gallery, London, Bath, St Ives. That's where it is for starters. And then here.
In Witherslack.
In Witherslack.
So when you say about how you returned to the UK, my question is how many years was it where you could survive, where you were getting decent money in to survive?
Oh, crikey. Oh, decent money? No, that's not happened yet.
Breaking even. You know,
breaking even.
Were you having to pick up part-time jobs and things like that, William, or were you able to concentrate solely on making pottery?
No, I concentrated on making pottery, but I wasn't breaking even. You know, it's just by sort of hook or by crook. You weren't breaking. I was breaking even after about 10 years, maybe 5-10 years. I don't know. It's difficult to evaluate, really. I suppose quantity of work. When I started doing the shows at home, I started breaking even, possibly, because I started doing these home shows and sort of rolling up the carpet and bringing people into the house. And I realised after a short time that all these exhibitions were fine away and in different galleries, but what gave me most pleasure in the actual selling of pottery was bringing people into my home. Now, some people would say that's just an inconvenience and they get in the way, but that's not the way we were taught about it in Japan. Because when people went to see Shimaoka, he always had time for whoever you were. If you made the effort to do it properly, he would spend all day talking to you. If you just rocked up and said, "Hey, can I see the pottery?" he'd say, "No, you can't." But if you rang up his wife and made an appointment, he would make sure his apprentice showed you everywhere in the pottery. He'd say, "Where do you want to see it?" "Well, we'd love to see your kilns." And he'd say, "Take them to the kilns." And he'd make time for you. And I think that's when people started coming to me and seeing the pottery here. It was rewarding. We don't see. I mean, we're not starved of people here, but we don't see a lot of people relative to we would say if we lived in a city. So we rolled up the carpet and we opened 4 days a year, every third or fourth year, a big show, proper big show, and people started coming, and they've been coming ever since.
Yeah, so I met you, William.
You know, we got that triangle, Dumfries, York to Manchester, and within that area we draw about 500 people, and about half of them turn up. We had over 200 here one night on an opening. It was chaos. The road was shut for the sake of pottery, which is how it should be.
Yeah, you like that.
You know?
Yeah.
It was good. When did you come to a show here? Did you come to a last one?
3 years ago. 3 years ago, yeah.
It's 3 years.
Yeah.
That's it. That was a small one. The bigger ones were about 10 or 15 years ago when they sort of got a bit out of hand, a bit rowdy. The potters got rowdy.
A mad potter.
Yeah.
So people who are looking to get into pottery and things like that, there's obviously the university system. Have you got any specific tips? Are you seeing the youth do anything different to how you got taught?
How they should get taught, or how to do it.
Well, sharing your knowledge in terms of being a potter, is there any advice you've got to someone who wants to get into it?
Don't say I can't do Tuesday. And don't say, why are you doing it like that? Because there's a reason for everything. And when I said in Japan, why are you doing it like that? They would say, that's, don't ask that question. That's how it is done. Don't question anything. Just keep looking. Just keep observing. Because when you go to Japan, if you're going to learn to make pots in Japan, there isn't the opportunity to say, to walk into a workshop, I'd like to know the temperature and the felspathic quality of the top glazes that you've got in this workshop from the point of view of, aesthetic beauty. That ain't going to happen. You can possibly say good morning, and then that's the end of your conversation. So keep looking. It's all about observation. The actual technical know-how of what I did in Japan was a cul-de-sac, because Japanese potters all over, and maybe all over everywhere in the world, are not going to turn around and tell you what they've been working on for 40 years of their life in the drop of a hat, because that's not how it works, actually. You've got to earn those points yourself. So most of it was about observation. Now, art schools, I'm sure, are specific, and they suit a certain genre of artists. But if you want to make pots and you want to throw pots, you've got to go and work in a studio. It depends what you want to do. If you're obsessed with baking pots and you only want to make pots and make your living out of making pots, get on with it. But if you want to experience, get off the train at Mashiko Station with a suitcase and go and find yourself a job. And they'll give you a job like that. Because if you go that extra mile, you'll meet those people who've gone that extra mile. And the people I met in Japan who'd gone there were like-minded people. We all wanted to do the same thing, and we all fell in love with it.
Yeah, you've walked off the beaten track. You've done things your way.
Isabella Bird, you're right there. Unbeaten Tracks in Japan. One of the greatest books written as a travel on Japan, and she went there in 1856 on a horse. I mean, before America opened it up, 1870, whenever it was, she went round on a horse. And I was, not on a horse, but that's it.
What career advice did you give to your children?
Do something that makes you happy.
Simple as that.
You get fulfillment, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if it feels right, do it. Absolutely, I would. I mean, I don't know, my temperament wasn't going to be that I was going to make, vast amounts of money out of my chosen career. But it's a way of life rather than a job. And if you look at it like that, you can cope with it, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. Be motivated by the passion, not motivated by the money or anything else.
No, I have seen people, who have a lot of money, which is not ironic, but they seem to have made a lot of money and then have great pleasure in turning around and saying, well, of course, the money was secondary. What I really wanted to do was make mobile telephones. Or what I really wanted to do was record records or something. The money was immaterial. It just happened. Well, that's the perfect scenario, but that's not for everybody, because you've got to work it out first, and I've never worked it out. I've only worked out how to make the pottery.
Okay.
That's the thing, and that's where I am with it. So it's not gonna go much further.
William, thank you very much for your time today.
Hey, it's been great. Thanks so much.
I've had a great chat.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good.
That's the end of the podcast. Thank you very much for listening. If you've got any feedback for me or want to get in touch to help me in any kind of way, I'd love to hear from you. My email address is sid@mail.uk. And if you can share it, like it, comment, send it to your mates, subscribe, all those jazz words, I'd really appreciate it. Hopefully catch you on the next podcast, guys. Bye.